for addiction professionals. Last presentation, Beatrice spoke to us about some basic definitions of terms, and then we also got to know about the brain communication. We learned about neurons and how they communicate with each other, and we also learned about neurotransmitters and how different substances, work with their different neurotransmitters. And then we talked about addiction as a chronic and relapsing brain disease, that persists in spite of negative consequences. Then she also introduced us to the progression of use to addiction. So today we are going to focus our attention on the progression, of addiction. I recall that Beatrice spoke to us about the various stages. We had people can take it, occasionally or as casual users, or maybe just social users of substances, and then from there they move on to regular users, and then up again to those who use it intensively, and then at the top we have those who are addicted. So if you look at the progression, it's just like a ladder. At the lowest rung of the ladder, you have those who just experiment or use the substance casually, but at the top of the ladder, or if you look at it as a triangle, at the vertex, you see we have a smaller proportion of people who become addicted or become dependent, on the substances. So today we're looking at the progression of addiction, as I said earlier. Now, in an individual's life, we have so many things that we attend to, so many things that give us pleasure, and usually we try to strike a balance in the way we carry out our activities of daily living. We have friends that we talk to, we have school, family, we sometimes find time for sports or exercise, work, then we also find time to eat. So if you look at the diagram here, you find that those who experiment with substances or just use substances occasionally still try to strike a balance with other activities that they carry out in their daily lives. But with the continuous usage of substances, then we move on to another regular use where you have people or clients might decide to give more attention to the substance. And you can see the substance use depicted in this diagram in red. And you find that the substance or attention to substance use is beginning to take over other activities of the individual. So you have a narrowing of the repertoire of activities that an individual carries out once he begins to use substances regularly. Then from there you move on to people, to intense users, and then finally progression to addiction. When an individual gets to this stage of substance use, then the desire and all efforts to get the substance take over all other activities. So the whole life is revolved around getting money to get the substance, using it, and then going back to look for money, get the substance again, and other alternative sources of pleasure or work or activities or other responsibilities in the individual's life are neglected because there's no time for lunch. We just started. But the question is, why do people start using substances? There are various reasons why people use substances. First of all, people become curious. What is the substance all about? And maybe they may see their peers or their friends or their parents using substances and they become very curious and they want to try it. sometimes friends are doing it and because they want to belong, then I also try it. But other reasons are to just feel good or to celebrate. Most times, like in my culture here, when people celebrate, they celebrate with wine or alcohol or whatever. It goes with the celebrations. So to celebrate or to feel better or even to do better. So I want you to actually pause for a moment and think of what people will do to feel good. Why would they use substances to feel good? What other things, or in what way would they use substances to make them feel good? And I want some responses from you, just for a minute. Why would they, in what way would they use substances to feel good? And I would like the administrator team to maybe give me one or two responses. Why people will actually use substances? How would they use them to feel good?
So folks, why don't you type them into your answers into the chat box, and I'll read a couple out. One says when people are distressed.
Yeah, they can use their chat and then maybe write one or two things, how people will use substances to feel good or to celebrate.
When young men want to speak to a lady. Or to feel bold. And so a couple of them are talking about when people don't feel good, when they're in a bad mood and want to feel better.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for these responses. But you find that some will use substances to feel better, which means that they are not happy with the state of mind in which they are in. So they will want to use substances to make them feel better. So how might people use substances to make them feel better? In what states will they find themselves that they will want to use substances to feel better? Please, can I get one or two responses for this?
Yeah, so a lot of people responded that way to your last question. If someone's bored, they use it to feel not bored. When they're in a low mood, to use stimulants to feel high or have energy. If someone's dealing with a disappointment, let's see.
Yes, very good responses indeed. Thank you very much. Then some use substances to do better. Perhaps they have a task at hand and they feel that they are not actually keeping up with the pace in which they're supposed to go, or they want to do it better. So can we have examples of how people might use substances, to do better? Even from personal experiences.
Okay, let's see, we have some. To work longer hours, to alleviate exam pressure or social anxiety, to perform better in sports, to stay awake, to cope with work pressure, to read better.
Yes, thank you very much. These are actually very good responses. I also find it, a similar thing in my own environment. For instance, one of the commonest drugs that people tend to indulge in is tramadol now, and they use it for a variety of reasons. Most time you find that from the poor ones to those who are even, up there in the socio-economic ladder, they use tramadol. So some use it to help them to give them energy, to do some physical or menial jobs, while you find that some may use the same thing, like students, they use it to read for longer hours and they don't get fatigued. And you find even armed forces personnel use it, so then we can use it and then we can work for a longer period. And some also use it as an aphrodisiac. So many people use it for different kind of things and they feel that it helps them to perform better. So people have different reasons for using substances. But generally, you find that there are three main reasons why people use substances. One, it may be for pleasure. They just want to derive pleasure, feel good. Then the second one is to treat pain. And pain might either be a physical pain as a result of an injury, disease, or even an accident, or as a result of some psychological pain from divorce, from failing exams, or whatever it might be. So some use substances to treat pain, but some use substances to function. And this is where you find people who will say, okay, students use it, so that they can read hard, and menial workers use it so that they can work for long hours and make a living out of it. And you find some who say, yes, it helps me, to improve on my social performance. So generally, these three reasons are reasons why people, tend to use substances, and most of them can actually fit into these three reasons. Let's go on. But the fact still remains, no one ever plans to become addicted. People who are currently addicted to one or two substances or are dependent on such substances never started the use of substance because they wanted to become addicted. It usually starts from just curiosity, casual user, social user, then you progress to maybe a more regular and then intense user, and then eventually the person becomes addicted. So that is the progression. So we have to understand with them, and because sometimes we can be very, very judgmental on these people, and especially in my own place, they tend to condemn them a lot. It's like they purposely set out to become addicted, and they see them, some of them, as just deviants or outcasts, which is not really the case. So we find that it's a progression, and no one ever plans to become addicted. We should always have this at the back of our mind so that we can help and also help explain it to our clients and their significant others. Then the question is, why doesn't everyone who tries a substance become addicted? Several people will use substances, but maybe just a few will become addicted. And as we said earlier on, if you look at it as a ladder, those at the lowest rank of the ladder are those who never get addicted. But those who become addicted are those who are at the end of the ladder there, up there. Or if you see it as a triangle, at the vertex up there. So you have fewer people become addicted compared to the majority who just are occasional users or just are regular users. So this brings us to the concept of vulnerability to addiction. It differs from one person to the other. And it differs because of so many factors. Some of them might be biological factors, and some of them are the environment which we live in. And the environment may be a physical environment, or even a social environment, a psychological environment, we find ourselves. So, and some might have other background illnesses, and some were, prescribed some medication, and in the end, they became, addicted because they were vulnerable. So there are many factors and that make an individual, to become addicted to a substance. And it's the interplay of these biological and environmental factors that leads, to addiction, as we shall see shortly. Again, why doesn't everyone who tries a substance become addicted? We have the interaction between biology or the genes, the genetic makeup of users, and then we have the environment on the other side, but they interact, biology and environment, So the genes interact, among themselves, and they also interact with the environment. So it is this interplay or interaction of factors that leads to addiction. So it's not just a straightforward thing. It's not just something that is as simplistic as some people tend to see it. And of course, you can find some diseases whereby you have a defect or a problem in a single gene. For instance, if you talk about sickle cell anemia or cystic fibrosis, yes, you might be able to identify one gene that has a problem. But for the rest of diseases, for instance, you talk about diabetes or you talk about hypertension, and mental illness. It's not just due to one single gene, but it's an interplay of these genes, with the environment that makes people become addicted to substances. And that's why some will take substances and they're okay. Doesn't really interfere with their responsibilities or what's expected of them, but they function well. But some will take it and eventually, graduate to addiction because we are all different individuals. We have different genetic makeup. So why doesn't everyone who tries a substance become addicted? The question continues. It is known that scientifically, it's been proven that between 40 and 60% of a person's vulnerability to addiction is actually genetic. And studies have been published. If you go to NIDA website, you can find the publication in 2014 which talks about it. So between 40 and 60% of a person's vulnerability to addiction is genetic. Some people actually find it difficult to believe that genetic factors contribute, to addiction. And I find students and even lecturers, arguing. I say, well, we are talking about evidence now and facts. It's not just an eyeball observation or a hearsay, but it's what has been studied and documented, and we see it. For those of us who are clinicians, this is what we see, that you find people who, for instance, who are genetically predisposed to developing addiction have a higher risk of becoming addicted than those who don't have many risk factors. And these risk factors will include not only the genes, and you find some people, in some people, it's something that may run even in their families, and then you find other risk factors. For instance, some people were abused, as they were growing up, and then you find some people are living in very harsh socio-economic environments, and some have also history of mental illness. So when you have so many risk factors, and then you add to this genetic loading, it makes one very vulnerable to developing, addiction. But the higher the number of risk factors, the higher the tendency or the vulnerability, to becoming addicted. So it's an interplay of factors and a complex one indeed. So it's not just genetics. For some people become addicted because their parents might even be using substances, and then they learn from them. Apart from the fact that they have the genes that predispose them to coming down with addiction problem, they also have parents or friends that use, and then they learn from them through social learning. They learn how to, you know, uh, uh, use these substances, and then they end up becoming addicted. And some of them might also be mentally ill. And for instance, they might be depressed, and then they use all kinds of substances that may temporarily lift their mood. And before they know it, they become, addicted to these substances. But for some, it's just a prescription. So doctors or health workers might prescribe drugs for their own patients. But some of these drugs, for instance, drugs that work for anxiety and some other uh, 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 ailments, might predispose people or users, to addiction. And some pain relievers, for instance, the opioid drugs, also have a high addictive potential. And when the individual uses such medicine that's prescribed by a doctor, if they are not careful, they end up desiring more and more of the drug. And before they know it, they start using the substance even outside prescription. And they try to look and find all kinds of symptoms to be able to get prescription. And eventually, they become addicted. So these are iatrogenic factors introduced by the health workers. They said they are prescribing the medicine to treat a problem, but inadvertently, they end up making the individual addicted. And I find this in my practice because I have several health workers, doctors, pharmacists, and nurses, and laboratory, scientists. I always have them, in fact, on admission for dependence on substances, particularly the opioids. And most of them, started using it because it was prescribed for them for one thing or the other, and then eventually they got addicted to these substances. The question continues, why doesn't everyone who tries a substance become addicted? Each gene is like a book that stores information, and we all have different genes that regulate. It might be our physical stature, it may be our color, or they may even determine, how we react to stress, and they make us more vulnerable to certain diseases, and so it's a more complex thing. When you talk about addiction, it's not as simplistic as people tend to see it. And as I said, people tend to argue blindly, and they don't want to accept that genes might be involved. But it is not known that, for instance, the same gene is responsible for addiction to alcohol and marijuana. And for those people who have such genes, they have a high tendency to become addicted to either alcohol or marijuana. So genes play a major role, and a gene contains the information required to make a protein or ribonucleic acid, the RNA, the building blocks of life. And these genes form our DNA. You find the sequence of genes that form our DNA and give us our own unique identity. So we differ from one individual to the other, and then from even our physical characteristics and our predisposition also to developing diseases varies from one individual to the other because of genetic differences. And it's also interesting, like for me, as a clinician, I've seen people who will come, I've seen monozygotic or identical twins will come. One, uses substances, but the other doesn't use substances. And I've seen even non-identical or dizygotic twins, and they find members of the family, and so many people that come, and they will ask me, well, why is this one using drug, and then the other one is not using substances? The other one is just a bad person. Or else, how can I explain? I said, no, there are genetics, even though they share the same genes, but there are differences in the way these genes express themselves, because as we grow up, we are impacted by our physical environment, we're impacted by our social, economic, psychological environment. And this also affects the way our genes, express themselves, later in life. And that is why, even though you may find monozygotic or identical twins, one might be using substance, the other might not be using substance. It's the biology that tends to, to explain it. And then the experiences in life modify the way these genes express themselves, making one, to become addicted, and then the other one to be, a non-user. And this is where, you talk about epigenetics. We continue. Why doesn't everyone who tries a substance become addicted? Questions, same question, but a lot of explanation to it. As we said, it's not as simplistic as we think about it. And when I find students or some other colleagues in other faculties come to argue with me and say, no, genes don't have a role in substance use. In fact, it's just social learning. They learn it from their peers or learn it from their parents. or from the environment, or because the culture, permits the use of such substances. That's why they're addicted. Genes have no role to play. I said no, but they don't know. You have to also know that these genes affect the way substances are metabolized in the body, and so many other ways. And we all metabolize, at different rates. And what, the degree in which a substance might affect me or might even stimulate my reward system might not be the same degree in which the substance might affect another person or even activate the reward system of the individual because of genetic differences in the way we process, our body processes the substances we take in. I suffice it to say too that the DNA sequence of any two individuals are 99.9% identical. Very interesting finding indeed. 99.9%. So all of us who are seated, who are participating in this presentation, we discovered that our genes are 99.9% identical. However, that 0.1% variation is profoundly important, and that differentiates me from other people, distinguishing one person from another, and how I react to things, how I metabolize substances, how I react to stress, how I take risk, in life, and so many other things. This 0.1%, or even my height, and so many other things, makes the difference, between one individual and the other. A very interesting finding. So this 0.1% actually accounts for it, and this is evident from research. We must have heard of the Human Genome Project, where scientists, have tried to actually determine the whole human genome, all the genes in the human body, and how they, they observe different functions, how they affect us in different ways. And medicine is going in that direction. It's going high tech. That I try to see if, in the end, you can look at an individual genetic makeup and see whether there are defects in a particular gene, and then be able to produce or manufacture a drug that will be tailored to fit the individual from its own genetic makeup. We are getting there, and hopefully, maybe one day we'll get there. And so most diseases, including addiction, are complicated. As I said earlier, they are complicated. There's no one single factor that can explain addiction, because addiction is not just is an interaction between biology and our environment, and the environment is a complex one. Addiction arises from complex interactions among multiple genes and from genetic interactions with environmental influences. Yes, the genes are many, in the DNA. They interact among themselves, but apart from the interaction amongst themselves, they also interact with the environment. And the interaction with the environment also depends on how exposed we are to the environment. I might be exposed to one adverse environment, and then my friend or my peer may not be, exposed to that kind of environment, but to a different environment. Some people have faced a lot of adversity in life. Some have not faced that kind of adversity. Some have, are lower down in the socio-economic ladder, but some people are higher up. So some people grew up in very difficult circumstances, but for some, life was more like a bed of roses for them. So we all differ, and the exposure from one differ from one person to the other. And as I said earlier on, that even if we are monozygotes or identical twins, as we grow in life, we're exposed to different environment, different realities, different environmental activities. So our genes too learn to respond differently, and that may help make them express themselves differently, so that one person comes down with particular illness, but the other twin might not come down with it. So addiction arises from complex interactions among multiple genes and from genetic interactions with the environment. So for those of us who do not really want to accept it, I hope if we convinced in the end, as we go on, that genes play a major role. And as I said, this 0.1%, makes all the difference in the way we manifest or react to many things around us. So environmental factors play a role. The home environment, For some, the home environment is a lovely place, a conducive place, and it's a place that you love. But for some, the home environment is hell, where parents live like cats and dogs, and there where there is all kinds of abuse in the environment. That home is not home for some people. And we particularly in this time of COVID-19, for some people, in fact, is staying at home because of this lockdown is hell, because they are subjected to more abuses, and they are praying that this the lockdown be lifted up so that they can break free from the abuse that they experience at home. School environment. The school environment is lovely for some people, but for some people it's hell. You have all kinds of bullies. You can have a teacher who is very difficult, and it makes it difficult for the pupils, and they become very anxious even when they go to school. They are not looking forward to going to school, but for some, they love to go to school. So different experiences, and then different individuals, and then even the neighborhood. For some, in the neighborhood, it's a drug den. Low socioeconomic factors. This is where you have all the criminals will aggregate, and then you find that people fight there like cats and dogs. There's a lot of depravity in that environment, and and then they learn all kind of criminal behavior. And if you look at all this with their genetic predisposition, you find that you have a high tendency of people in the slums and other places coming down with all kinds of substance use disorders. And then family and friends too. The type of friends we mingle with or our peers also might influence us apart from our own genetic disposition. Then cultural customs and the morals, what is acceptable in my environment. In my environment, where alcohol is not forbidden, people can drink. And the certain is that in some places, even children are given alcohol to drink, which is not proper because it tends to interfere with their development. But in other places, it is not so, it's forbidden. So cultural environments too. So people who live in that kind of environment are most likely going to use substances. So how a substance is used is a factor. Smoking or injecting a substance increases addictive potential because these substances work very fast, and the faster it is, it takes you to a high, and after that high, it brings you down to to a below normal level, and it may make you go screaming or craving for something to lift you out of the depression that the substance withdrawal has brought you to. So these are issues, and that is why you find that for the route of administration or for substances that are faster acting, they tend to be more addictive. They have a higher addictive potential than those ones that are, take time to act. And then they tend also to be able to activate the reward system and may lead to more secretion of dopamine. If you recall what Beatrice told us that time, in the reward pathway, and then they get a lot of pleasure. But after the cessation of use, they may get a serious drop, and then it drops them down to a level that is below what they started with, and then they may go into depression, and then they are craving for something to lift them out of the depression. Oftentimes, I find I get patients who come to me, and when I ask them, they don't use just single substances, especially young people. They tend to use it in combination. They tell me, doctor, I use cocaine, but sometimes it drives me crazy, very high, and I'm about losing, my sense of self. Then I step down with heroin because when I take it, I get euphoria. Then I'm calm. So eventually, they become addicted to two substances. Then you have to battle, with two substances instead of, a single substance. So. Uh, we have come to the end of this bit of the presentation, and I want you to be able to create a fictional, it's a case study here. You create a fictional character or a case study whereby you'll be able to include or maybe visualize somebody that you know in your environment, or create one that you know that is addicted to a particular substance, and think of the behavior changes that the individual exhibits in that community, and then you look at the biological factors that would have contributed to the development of addiction, and then the interaction of the biological factors in that fictional case study you've created with environmental factors. So try to be creative and think of one before my colleague comes on board. Thank you very much for listening, and if there are questions, I'll be most willing to respond to them before my colleague takes over. Thank you very much.
Moses, perhaps we could make this assignment homework and put it on the email exchange that we all have, so that we can get to Marikwe, because I'm afraid we'll run out of time. Would people, so maybe I'll do that. Maybe I'll post it as an email in that email link. Marikwe, can you?
Okay.
Yes.
I'll be glad to answer them if they send it on the email.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think if people have questions, maybe that's the way to ask the questions too.
It's okay. Yeah. All right. Good evening. Good evening. We are going to move to the next module, which is module 4. And the module focuses on social stigma. I know that my colleague here has, I don't know why there's an echo. My colleague has taken you through to illustrate why addiction is a biological disease, the biological aspect of it. I'm just buying time here so that I can put on the slide. Slideshow. Just take this a little bit up. Okay. So we'll be moving on to, there we go. We'll be moving on to social stigma. Let's now briefly, I know that we are running a little bit out of time, but we'll try to make sure that we catch up. If it's okay with you, I'm going to just request that we spend extra 5 minutes so that we can cover the content, more especially that we've run a short of time. So coming back to the module, we are hoping that at the end of the module, we'll be in a position to define what social stigma is. We'll be able to describe the possible impact or the effects of stigma as it relates to addiction, and hopefully also come up with strategies by the end of this module that we can actually utilize to counteract stigma. Now, before we go into the definition of stigma, I wanted us to point out the fact that we know that social stigma actually exists in communities. It cuts across all cultures. And interestingly, even within subgroups within a community, social stigma exists. The question is then, what really precipitates social stigma? Social stigma is precipitated by a few issues. Number one being unfounded fear, fear that does not have legitimacy. One of the things that people sometimes in our practices, I don't know about you, where they would say people with substance use disorder are dangerous. That is very unfounded, because that is not necessarily true. The other reason as to why we have social stigma is a lack of knowledge about the disorder itself. In this instance, we are talking about addiction, and a lack of information. That could be lack of information regarding addiction itself, regarding people with substance use disorder. So I want you to take a minute to note what comes to your mind when you hear the word stigma. We can go to the chat, just briefly do that. What comes to your mind when you hear the word stigma? Just a minute. Kim, you can kindly just read 2 or 3 comments so that we move on.
Yes, discrimination, stereotyping, labeling.
Okay.
Them and us attitude.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, good. I'm glad that you've actually noted some of the words that usually are relate to stigma, like discrimination, prejudice, and all that. We will shortly uncover or unpack some of the words that you've noted in your chat, such as discrimination, what discrimination is, in a short bit. Now, let's come back to the definition of what social stigma is. It is severe social disapproval of personal characteristics, note that, beliefs that are against cultural norms. And as I've already noted, social stigma has consequences. It can lead to status loss, discrimination, and exclusion of meaningful participation. Now, I'm gonna just ask you to think about what discrimination is. I've highlighted it in red, and there's a reason as to why it's important for us to actually understand what discrimination is and how it relates to social stigma. If I can just have people raise up their hand, and then Kim, you can just choose one person to tell us what discrimination is, or define discrimination for us. You can raise your hand, then from there, your mic will be unmuted so that you share with us what your understanding of discrimination is. I see Charles Nongwa. What is discrimination?
Hello.
Yes.
Discrimination is a situation where people shy away from interacting with the individual. They keep the individual at an arm's length, and even when they are engaging in some activities that is supposed to participate, they deliberately exclude the person. That's discrimination.
No, thank you for the response. From what Charles just said, there is deliberate active action, and I do appreciate the fact that you've highlighted that it's an action. There's a behavior that we see in order for us to say somebody is discriminating. Now, thinking about our topic, which is substance use and addiction, in your communities, how are people with substance use disorders discriminated? In what ways? Do you notice that people with addiction issues or people with substance use disorder are addicted? And I want us to note our responses in the chat just so that we can just share briefly. How do you notice that people are discriminated, more especially, in particular, not more especially, in particular, people with SUD? In your communities, how are people with SUD discriminated? One minute. We can take 2 comments from different regions just so that we can compare.
We have a couple that are job related. They don't get a job, or they lose their job. And then in South Sudan, says they can't easily get married. A lot of them are related to jobs, name calling. Denied access to voting, employment, and quality health care.
No, thank you for sharing. I know that all of us can see the experiences from different countries, different regions. I would want to actually probably take an opportunity to just focus on that one issue about name calling, right? Is it discrimination though? Because there is an issue in terms of the two terms. There's discrimination and prejudice that I would want to actually, for us to distinguish. Prejudice is more about an opinion, right? And then discrimination is about an action, right? And often when we have disapproval of of behaviors or characteristics, it leads to discrimination. And then prejudice, because you already have opinions about a particular person that are negative, they can lead to the action of discrimination, just so that we get the two terms correctly when we are moving on. But thank you for noting your experiences from your different countries. One of the things in continuing with social stigma is that it can interfere with effective treatment. And this is more especially when we are not fully knowledgeable about a disorder or a condition. That is the one thing that contributes to interference with treatment as it relates to addiction. A person who sees addiction being stigmatized in their community might feel ashamed and be reluctant to seek treatment. Social support for recovery may not be adequate in a community that stigmatizes addiction. Of course, when a community as a whole stigmatizes addiction, people are more likely to internalize the stigma and thereby actually developing shame or guilt about the disorder, hence a reluctance to seek treatment. There is one particular study that we would like to share with you that was done actually by University of Nevada. The study had 197 participants, and the participants were from residential treatment facilities and outpatient facilities. Obviously, for the participants had a diagnosis of SUD. What they investigated was stigma in individuals receiving treatment. What they found in terms of participants, the participants had reported high levels of perceived stigma and high levels of actual stigma. In addition, the participants also reported that people treated them differently. That is 60%. Others reported that other people were afraid of them. That is 46%. Remember, we said it's social stigma is precipitated by unfounded fear. Some of the participants reported that family members gave up on them. That is 45%, which is a lot. Some of the participants said that their friends rejected them after knowing that they have SUD. And then employers paid some a lower wage after hearing that they are receiving treatment. You can see that social stigma impacts people in treatment in different ways. I think one of the things that in the previous slide that we had mentioned was the fact that, you know, when a community stigmatizes addiction, social support is likely to be not given to people in recovery. So the study does augment or maybe probably support the points that were in the previous slide. One of the interesting findings from the study, which is not necessarily noted here, is the fact that for participants who injected drugs, they reported higher perceived stigma as compared to the other groups of participants. Continue in terms of what the findings of the study were. The study revealed that there is actually a relationship between whether people perceived that they were stigmatized and whether they started recovery or maintained recovery. So the study actually showed that stigma negatively affects recovery rate. Now, in talking about stigma, stigma actually contributes to people internalizing, social stigma contributes to internalization of stigma. And usually we find that our clients actually have stress of hiding a substance use disorder, either out of shame or avoiding to be stigmatized by people in the community. And this can actually lead to other medical and social problems and make it harder even for them to seek treatment at the end of the day. We see that sometimes when we have patients or clients who perceive stigma or have actually experienced stigma, they tend to sometimes have psychosomatic disorders because of the hiding of SUD and the reluctance to actually seek treatment, either for SUD or for other medical conditions. Now, thinking about some of the words that we, even as health professionals, actually use. I know we usually say our clients have a clean chest and we clap, right? Some of the words that are used to describe our clients are addict, dirty, abuser, junkie, user. I'm hoping that most of us do not use these words. Just looking at these words here, abuser, user, junkie, and all addict, I would want us to pause for a minute to think about how these labels or this language actually stigmatizes our clients. And we can go back to the chat room and just note your opinion in terms of how these words actually stigmatize. I'm going to give you 2 minutes just so that we understand how these words actually stigmatize people that we work with. Why are we saying they are stigmatizing? How are they stigmatizing user? We can read 4 or 5 comments from the chat.
You want me to read them?
Yes.
They reduce self-esteem, they label and discredit patients. The words do not separate the person from the condition. Labeling. Because of, oh, here we go. Addict suggests that the person has lost control of his senses and is judged. From clinical practice, many of these clients present with abnormal behavior and are not behave responsibly.
Okay.
Hear more, but yeah.
Yes, no, thank you. We are on the right track in terms of how these actually terms contribute to stigmatizing people with SUD. Clearly, somebody has noted that they do not differentiate the person from the disorder, right? One of the things also in terms of that, the stigmatizing nature is that they tend to give an idea that the disorder is permanent. It's like this is now your label. So they're stigmatizing because they do not differentiate, like I said, number one, differentiate the person from the disorder. They give a sense that this is a permanent thing. Remember last week, even all along, we've been saying that it's a chronic disease. Addiction is a chronic disease, but there is a possibility of recovery. It's not curable, but it's manageable. So the permanency part of it comes from these words, or the idea that it's people can never recover, or these people, or we even say these people do not amount to anything. So these are some of the words that sometimes we find ourselves, even as clinicians, actually using. Of interest in terms of us, because we are not immune as clinicians, we sometimes use languages like clean, dirty. And these words actually reinforce the stigma. And I'm just going to pick Dr. Hagito, who's on the screen here, to tell us how are these words actually reinforcing stigma? Dr. Ehijiator. I know probably I'm butchering your name. How are these words actually reinforcing stigma?
You can unmute yourself too, because I'm not finding him.
Okay. Or any other person, if he didn't hear that or she didn't hear that, any volunteer? Okay, Charles again has raised the hand. Thank you. How are these actually reinforcing stigma?
Okay, it makes the clients or the people that are having the addiction problem feel rejected. Makes them feel that nobody understands them. And then they will not be willing to come out for treatment. Instead, they will prefer to remain in their hideout and keep doing drugs because they feel their colleagues in the hideout understand them.
Yes, true. Thank you. They also imply that people are dirty, right? If you say, I have a clean test, it implies that there is filth. And sometimes when these words are used, it also implies that the disorder itself is actually filthy. Though some clinicians, I know that usually we like to say, no, he's been clean for several months. He's been clean for a week. So the implication in saying that, it has the connotation that something is filthy. That is why we say some of these words unknowingly stigmatize our clients or patients. How can we address social stigma or stigma in terms of people with SUD? One is to probably put the person first. Examples here is person with substance use disorder as compared to addict, as compared to a junkie, person who injects drugs, a person with addiction, right? It actually separates the person from the disorder, right? Unlike if we use the stigmatizing languages. This exercise, it carries on from Dr. Moses' exercise. I thought maybe we could actually give an opportunity just for two people to share with us, because since we are not going to do a role play, to share with us an experience from their clinical practice or from their teaching where they had a patient or a client who reported being stigmatized and what their experiences were. Just 2 minutes. One from West Africa, I'm going to choose West Africa and East Africa, to just share with us an experience where they had a client or had somebody in their practice, whether it was academic or clinical work, a patient who was stigmatized. Okay, Samuel Dakak.
Can I go on?
I think we, Samuel.
Yes, can I go on?
Yes, please, thank you.
Okay, I am from Nigeria. I actually work in the university here in Nigeria, and we have a psychological services center where students can actually come. Like, it's much more like a drop-in center where they actually get attended to for their substance use issues. There was an instance where an individual who was trying to work on his substance use problem came in, and then there was a newly employed staff who actually made use of some names that they are used to calling him when he was using drugs every day. And when we discovered that he didn't want to actually continue the treatment, we actually bumped into him around the campus. And I remember the reason why he didn't want to continue is that the supposed staff that actually called him by name, make him feel very stigmatized, and in the end, he felt there was no need for him to continue the treatment.
Thank you, Charles, for your experience, for sharing. Anybody else?
Good evening, all. Mine is a student who had a problem of epilepsy.
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. I'm Dr. Oko from Nigeria. At the State Polytechnic Counseling Center. They still had a problem of epilepsy in the classroom. So after that incident, they began to avoid him, even on the seat where he's on the roll in the classroom. No one wanted to sit close to him. And because of that, he wanted to withdraw from the program. We have to work on him to understand the fact that epilepsy is not a cause for a terminal sickness. He can adjust to it and still continue his studies. I have to write to the lecturers to give him the face seat, front seat in the classroom, to make sure he sees them so that he can understand what's going on in the classroom. Whether our students want him or not, they should create room for him there. And by the time they implemented all these things, he was able to finish his program.
No, thank you. I think your example also illustrates that there are certain diseases or disorders similar to addiction where people are stigmatized. So thank you for sharing. Clearly, we have had, I'm thinking that if we are in the field, we've had experiences with our clients where they reported being stigmatized, perceived or actual stigma. So thank you, the two doctors, Dr. Samuel and Dr. Oko, for sharing your experiences. When you are doing face-to-face, obviously it's interesting that people do role play and then they talk about the experience, having taken that role of a client being stigmatized and sharing the experiences. So we are hoping that when you go back and do your training, you will have an opportunity to actually do the exercises themselves. So thank you. Continuing. Stigma or social stigma can lead to self-fulfilling predictions that those who are addicted cannot recover or play positive and productive social roles. Like I've noted before, that stigma, social stigma, people sometimes internalize it and live to what people perceive of them. And one of those stereotypes is the fact that people that, or individuals with SUD actually do not have productive social roles, which is not true. It can lead to discrimination as we've already noted, employers not wanting to hire anyone in recovery. One of the things that I have experienced when we had a group and there was somebody in recovery, just to think about stigma and how it relates to stereotypes. There was an incident where something went missing and there was a person in recovery and everybody started thinking and looking towards that individual. Clearly, to me, it highlighted the fact that stereotypes and social stigma still exist, even within communities or even amongst clinicians sometimes. Social stigma can lead those who are addicted to feel hopeless and reluctant to help. So we do have a role as clinicians actually to reduce stigma. One of the things that we can do as clinicians is actually to be more aware and to talk about the impact of stigma on people with SUDs. We can also actively ensure that we reflect on ourselves to see whether we have those stereotypes and how we address them when we interact with our clients in our practices. Now, this is the last slide of the day. I know we are not going to do the exercise right now, but it is for us to take as homework. Number one of the questions that we could ask is, have you been surprised by anything thus far? Remember, we started off on On Tuesday, we talked about substance use or addiction as a chronic brain disease and a relapsing disease. So the question is, have you accepted that addiction is actually a chronic disease? How has your thinking changed in any way, if it has? What are some of the ways you might be able to fight stigma in your community? So that is the end. It's 8 o'clock my time. So I know we are probably almost 10 minutes late into our session. And thank you for staying with us, because I see that all of us, most of us are still here. So that is the end. If you have questions about stigma, like what Moses said, we can post the questions in our chat and we'll be answering them when we leave from here, even before we get to the next lesson on Tuesday. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mercury. Before everyone leaves, we would like to try to start a half hour early next week so we can have a discussion about how we want to do UTC 2. So Tuesday will be the end of the UTC 1 module, and we want to talk about timing, frequency, and that kind of thing with the group. And so when I send out the message, it will be for a half hour earlier. So just keep that in mind. And people are starting to leave, I think. So I will send a message over the weekend probably, and then remind you on Tuesday about the new time, and we'll see you all next week. Bye, everybody.
Bye. Yeah.